Ohio, to the best of my ability and in accordance with the laws now in effect and hereafter to be enacted during my continuance in said office and until my successor is chosen and qualified.
Thank you. You want to give me that? I'll take it.
Shake your hand.
Congratulations. And everybody else is here too. Oh, everybody else is here too. Thank you. Welcome, very much. Thank you very much. Congrats. All right. Mr. Liming, when you're ready.
Okay, if you'll pull out this budget hearing form that should be in your packet, and we will review this. Just wanted to start by reviewing what this is a tax budget as required by the county auditor's office. Most of the counties in Ohio do not require this, but Greene County does. It is pretty much solely for the purpose of the county auditor and treasurer's office seeing our debt and our bond issue, where we predict our balances are going to be in the bond fund, so that they can set the tax rate charged to the taxpayers to pay off our principal and interest that year. So theoretically, as years go by, that village will go down and down, and taxes from our debt will go down. So let's just turn to the first page there. And by the way, it's kind of informal, so if anybody has any questions, just stop me during this. We've got a lot of time to review this, probably more time than it's going to take. So first page, this is the form that the auditor gives me in the first 3 pages, actually. And it shows there in the column with the numbers that the auditor is predicting for the tax budget year, which is 21-22, July 1, 21, June 30th, 22, that we will bring in $21,914,000 in the general fund from real estate taxes and $873,000 from permanent improvement fund a levy that we passed somewhere around the year 2000, the 2 mil levy. You can see off to the right that where it states 4.5 mils, that's our inside millage amount. And that's a whole lesson in itself about what inside millage is. But basically, that 4.5 mils can grow with inflation and with property values increasing. So we do receive extra money on 4.5 mils if your house value goes up. We do not on the 54.80 mils that we passed over the history of this school district. That's our voted millage, not our effective millage. So inside millage brings in the $2,923,000 number there. So really, a lot of this stuff isn't something that you have to know. It's just if you're really into taxes and numbers, you'd be interested in that. Turn the page. These are the levies listed that we have passed over the history of the district. And some of the dates that are listed there are either the date that the levy was originally passed, or if it was replaced and voted in, the date that it was replaced. So you can see on the second levy listed there, see where it says May 5th, 2015. That's the last levy that we passed in this district. It was a replacement of an old 5.5 mil levy, I think, that was passed originally in the 1970s. And then the amount off to the right there, 3 million plus, that's the amount that levy brings in now. If you do the math, if that levy were to be passed today at 5.5 mils, it would bring in about 3.6 million, a little over 3.6 million. So just to give you an idea of how, when a levy is passed, it goes against the property values in your district at that time, and it never really increases. So that's why you're going to see larger numbers there. All the rest of these are just the levies we either passed or replaced over the years, and the amount that they will bring in, and the total there equals what we saw on the front page for outside the 10 mils, and inside the 10 mils is not listed here. And then our PI levy of $873,000. We'll flip to the next page. This is a form that probably was, it's been in effect for 30 years. So I don't know why we have all this stuff written all over this page. The only item on that whole page that's important is our estimated tax valuation from the county auditor, $657,215,760. And that's as appraised by the Greene County Auditor's Office, the value of all the properties in the Bellbrook-Sugarcreek School District. That's the total. Flip one more time, we have the 5-year forecast that this board's already passed in the November school board meeting. So this isn't anything new, it just has to be included with the tax budget that I sent to the county auditor. And so you've got a copy of it. So I don't know that I need to review that necessarily because it was reviewed at the November meeting in detail and passed. It shows that we're going into red in the general fund for fiscal year 24 for sure, getting close in 23. And that's an overall cash balance. So then the remaining few pages there, or the next front and back and front, are notes to that 5-year forecast, stating how I got the numbers that I did that were plugged in. We've already reviewed that too, so if you want to flip to this next page where it says bond retirement 2003 issue at the top. So this is the first one that is important, in my opinion, especially for the treasurer and auditor of the county. This is our bond issue that was passed in 2003 to build the middle school, to buy the 40 acres that the middle school is built on, and to renovate and add on to the high school in Stephenville, and then renovate BCI a little bit. But mostly, the bulk of the money, of course, is to build the middle school and buy the land. If you notice these 5 columns, one thing I want to point out is the first 2 columns are for a 1-year period, and then the next 3 are 6-month periods. I don't know why they do it like that. It makes it difficult to read if you're comparing numbers across. You think in the 3rd column something's going crazy. It's just a 6-month period. And the 3rd and 4th columns are our budget year we're talking about, July 1st, 21 to June 30, 22. And you can see under receipts, if you go down to, I think it's the 3rd row there, it says total receipts for our tax budget year. You have $1,322,000 and $1,470,000. Those added together is what we're estimated to bring in to our bond retirement fund through the 4.7 mils that the auditor has set. We approved, I think, in November also to fund this issue. And then after that's the expenditures. This is a 28-year bond issue passed in 2003. Seems like a long time, but it expires December 1st, 2031, and that's only 10 and a half years, almost 11. So time flies. Any questions about that bond issue? It's the only bond issue that we have. A bond issue is a voted millage to build a building or renovate buildings. And so that's, none of that money can obviously be spent on anything but the debt for that issue that was passed. And we'll talk about what the total amount is a couple pages from now. We're going to flip to that next one, the Permanent Improvement Fund, 003. This is the 3rd and final fund that has real estate tax funding. So you have a general fund, the bond retirement fund, and then this Permanent Improvement Fund. It's the recommendation of the Ohio Department of Education that every district try to pass one of these. We did, like I said, I think this was passed around the year 2000, before I got here. But this is important because when all of a sudden you need to replace a roof, it's going to be $350,000. And you have money in a PI fund, hopefully, that you save to buy that or to pay for it. I listed some things that we spend this money for. We bring in about $875,000 a year now into this account. We spend it to buy any school buses that we buy, any vehicle that we might have to buy for maintenance. If it's a year where we have to have a truck for maintenance or a mower or maybe the kind of vehicle that would clear snow off in the winter, the blade, that kind of thing. Anything like that comes out of here. Any technology that's above Josh's massive technology general fund budget, joking, we don't give him a whole lot of money in general fund, so anything over that, if we have a Chromebook refresh or any server purchases, anything that's going to cost a lot of money for tech, comes out of here. We bought our phone system 8 or 10 years ago, or 6 or 8, however long ago that was, when we revamped that. And let's see what else. We spent a little bit of money on band instruments. We give the band, it used to be $25,000, one of our cuts, we knocked it down to $15,000. I don't know how many new musical instruments that buys, probably not very many. And then something like the playground, the BCI, we received a lot of donations for that. They didn't quite cover the whole thing, so whatever the balance was that we know came on this account. There are numerous things we do that are big repairs or big ticket equipment item that we have to buy that comes out as PI fund. And we pretty much spend, this year's a little different because of COVID, of course, but normally we spend about all of that $800 and some thousand that it brings in each year. Sometimes we're saving for a project, but it's accounted for. Okay, you want to flip any questions on anything we've covered so far? If we flip to the page that says other non-tax levy funds, don't know why they asked for this in this budget, because we have here the lunchroom fund, and we have 2 student activity accounts, the principal's activity fund, 018, and the athletic funding. None of those are tax dollars. Then we have 2 state grants and 4 federal grants. We usually get more than 4, but these are the only 4 that I'm sure we're going to get next year. So I only include these, and then I amend and add the others as we go along. When we have the board amend the appropriations and budget, that's what we're doing. So it's just a rough, you tell by the numbers, just a rough estimate. Some of them start with no money at the beginning of the year. And I guess we're going to get X number of dollars, we're going to spend all of it, and give them 0. So it's not a accounting, you have to have a CPA to do this. So I don't know why they ask for these simple funds that just spend all out. But they want to know our estimate of what we're spending in each one of these, I guess. Then the last page is probably fairly important for you guys to know, at least the summary of it. I'm going to have to put my glasses on for this one, I can see these numbers. So we have 4 items of debt in this district. We have the middle school bond issue that I just spoke about in the left column, passed in 2003. We have a lease purchase that was partially to pay for the stadium and partially for construction in 2003 that the bond issue did not quite cover. And then the third one is a smaller one to finish the stadium. Originally, when Miami Valley Hospital was going to give us half the money for the stadium, approximately, they were giving us $1.5 million, and it cost $3.3 million total. We thought that they were going to write us a check for $1.5 million, and we borrowed the rest of the money on this lease purchase, one of these. And then it turns out they're going to, the contract, as it was finalized, called for about $100,000 a year for 15 years that they were going to pay us. So we had to borrow all the money for the stadium. So that's why we had to do the second lease purchase. The second one there expires in about 3 years. So it was a, I think it was a 15-year, I don't believe it says there, but yeah, it's a 15-year lease purchase. It expires in about 3 years. And the one on the right that expires in about 4 more years is the unvoted bonds for the energy project that we did through Energy Optimizers, where we replaced windows and they did some boiler work and a bunch of things with our entrances and things like that to save us money on energy. And we pay off the cost of that project with these unvoted bonds. So there at the top, if you're interested in the details, it says what fund we pay it out of, what the interest rates are on each one of these debts, when they were issued, when they expire, and a little description of what it's for. So the auditor needs to know all of this to do what he has to do to set the bond rate. if you want to know totals, the back of the page, the very last page, shows what our debt is. For instance, if you follow along in that last line, the voted middle school bond issue, we still owe $27,145,000 in principal, and we will pay $7,472,850 in interest on that over the next, I believe it's 11 years, or I think it's like 10 or 11. And then you can follow that across to the right there, where the last figure to the bottom right shows that our debt is $38,766,000. It's really now only about $36.5 million because we've made one payment that's still listed as outstanding. The first one up there, December 1st, 2020, we've already made that payment on that first row on the back page. So, let's see, as I said before, 4.71 mils is the millage that the auditor set for 2021 to be enforced to yield money to pay off the bond retirement debt. And that's just the left column. The others we pay off out of our own pocket, out of PI or general fund. So that in a nutshell is the tax budget. Does anyone have any questions about anything we covered here? I have to file this, the deadline is January 20th to file with the Greene County Auditor, and I used to have to go to a budget hearing every year, and it was like a court case. You're sworn in, there's a court recorder, and they just drill you with questions, and you're on camera. So it was a little unnerving because it's very complex. You can look like you don't know what you're doing pretty easily in those kind of situations, but they've backed off now, and they only have a hearing when they feel like they want to call us in for a hearing once every so many years. And it's really informal. You sit around across the table and talk about paperwork, and there's nothing formal about that. So, anything, and we do want to, we have a resolution during the regular meeting to approve this tax budget. And it's not binding. It can be amended if anytime during the year something changes, and we can have the board amend it. So I think that's all I have.
Kevin,
Yes.
forgive my ignorance,
That's
but
okay.
in our current fiscal situation, are there opportunities? I know, I'm sure we can't pay any of this off early in order to save interest money because we don't have a lot of money floating around. But refinancing any of this debt, is that an option?
I know we cannot do anything with the first column or the last column. So it would be one of those two in the middle. And I talked to Dr. Kozak about this just the other day. He brought it up to me. I want to check into that second column. That's the one that I think we can do something about because it's a long-term lease, and it was 4.55%. We might be able to do something there. So I'll have to talk to the bank, and we went through on that, and I'll check my folder and see what that is. If that is something I want to do, it could
Even just a little bit could be substantial for
yes.
Right.
Definitely.
All right. Anything else, sir?
I think that's all I've got.
All right, thank you very much. Budget hearing?
Budget hearing. So now's the time we want to reflect the lights.
Yes. Good evening. It's 7 o'clock. It's time for the Bellbrook-Sugarcreek Board of Education meeting. This is a meeting of the Bellbrook-Sugarcreek Board of Education in public for the purpose of conducting the school district's business, and is not to be considered a public community meeting. There is a time for public participation during the meeting and is indicated on the agenda item. Mr. Lyman, will you please call the roll?
Mr. Carpenter?
Here.
Mrs. Dorn?
Here?
Mrs. Long?
Here. Mr.
Price?
Here.
Mrs. Sloughman?
Here.
Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. As this is the first meeting of the new year, we elect president and a vice president of the school board at the January meeting. For board members, this is a little different from our normal process. We will have nominations for the president's position, and then we'll have a resolution to close nominations, and we'll vote on that. And then we'll have a roll call vote on the candidate or candidates for the president's position. And then we will do the same thing for the vice president's position. So do we have any nominations for president?
Would you consider doing it again?
I would. Are there other nominations? Do I have a motion to close nominations?
So moved.
Mrs. Wagner and Mr. Price as a second. So now we are voting on whether or not to close nominations for the president's position. Mr. Lyman, will you please call the roll?
Mr. Carpenter?
Yes.
Mrs. Dorn?
Yes.
Mrs. Long?
Yes.
Mr. Price?
Yes.
Mrs. Sloughman?
Yes.
All right, motion passes. Mr. Lyman, please call the roll then on the vote.
Okay, and on this, you will either answer Mr. Carpenter or no. Would be the other answer. Okay. Mrs. Dorn?
Mr. Carpenter.
Mrs. Long?
Mr. Carpenter.
Mr. Price?
Mr. Carpenter.
Mrs. Sloughman?
Mr. Carpenter.
And Mr. Carpenter?
I'll abstain. All right, I don't have to change seats with anybody, so we'll continue on from here then. Nominations for vice president. I would nominate Mrs. Sloughman. Are there any other nominations? All right, we have a motion to close nominations for the vice president spot.
So moved.
Mrs. Long,
Second.
Mrs. Dorn, and Mr. Lyman, would you call the roll on closing nominations?
Okay, Mrs. Long?
Yes.
Mr. Price?
Yes.
Mrs. Sloughman?
Yes.
Mr. Carpenter?
Yes.
Mrs. Dorn?
Yes.
Motion passes. And now the vote on the president's position will be Mrs. Sloughman or no.
Correct. Okay, Mr. Price?
Mrs. Sloughman.
Mrs. Sloughman?
Mrs. Sloughman.
Mr. Carpenter?
Mrs. Sloughman.
Mrs. Dorn?
Mrs. Sloughman.
And Mrs. Long?
Mrs. Sloughman.
Thank you very much. Mrs. Sloughman, you are reading as our vice president. Thank you very much. Okay, going on to good news recognition. We have a retiree, Carol Green. If you would like to come up, please. Carol has been with our district for 22 years.
Yes.
As a special needs assistant starting out at facsimile in 1998. And then in 2000, the library media specialist at the middle school. Got a great career here.
Yes, I did.
Thank you so very much. Was there anything you'd like to say?
I just want to thank you guys for giving me the opportunity, for Jeanette hiring me to be a librarian a long time ago. and give me a chance. And I hope the best for the schools and that you guys get back to normal soon, really.
We hope for that part too. Thank you so very, very much, and congratulations. We also have some other recognitions here this evening. For the first team, division number 3, All Ohio Honors linebacker in the football, Ethan Fryman. Congratulations. Also for football, Justin Kukin, honorable mention, Division 3, All Ohio Honors on the defensive line. And for the second team, Division 3, All Ohio Honors linebacker, Taylor Jordan. Congratulations, sir. And finally, third team, Division 3, All Ohio Honors for running back, Seth Barandi. Congratulations. All right, our next is for Dr. Kozak.
January is School Board Recognition Month, so I have a proclamation here to read for our school board. Whereas our community values that quality education is a vital step along the pathway to success for our children, and whereas David Carpenter, Audra Dorn, Karen Long, Kevin Price, and Virginia Sloughlin will contribute greatly to this community through their service on the Bellbrook-Sugarcreek Local Board of Education, and whereas those local decision makers set the policies and procedures to govern all aspects of school district operation, and whereas the school board keeps attention focused on progress toward the school district's goals, maintains two-way communication loop with all segments of the community, and whereas these school board members are serving our community with integrity, honor, and commitment to our children's futures, now therefore I, Superintendent Douglas Kozak, do hereby declare my appreciation of the members of Bellbrook-Sugarcreek Local School Board and proclaim the month of January 2021 as School Board Recognition Month in the Bellbrook-Sugarcreek Local School District. I urge all citizens to join me in recognizing the dedication and hard work of our local school board members and to continue working with them to mold an educational system that meets the needs of both today's and tomorrow's students. An official recognition whereof I hereby affix my signature to this 14th day of January 2021. And as everybody knows, 2020 has been a crazy year, and it takes a lot of time, effort, energy, a lot of hard decision making going on at the school board. And so I definitely appreciate everything that they have done for our students, staff, parents, and our community. And just thank you for your leadership and service to our community. So I have certificates here for each of you. And Mr. Carpenter,
Thank you very much.
you started that there. I'll just go on. First month, where you have a certificate, first meeting. Mrs. Long.
Is your superintendent one?
There should be.
I think it was last one.
There should be.
Mrs. Sloughlin.
Okay.
Elbow bump, there we go. And Mr. Price.
Thank you, Dr. Kozak. I will say that the elbow bump from the football players was a little more assertive than yours.
Yeah, well, that's what happens in old age here. You should have seen me in my younger days. No.
The next segment of our meeting is the reorganizational meeting. This is another one of the annual components of the for school board function. We establish a number of policies for decisions ahead of time for how we will operate business during the coming year. So Mr. Lyman will work through the vast majority of those, but it's something we do on an annual basis.
I'm going to motion to set the service fund for fiscal year 22 at $4,000. The way this works, we pass the resolution, we get a motion in second, and then we describe what we're doing here. So you don't know, we have to get it on the tape first before we can talk about it. So the motion for number 6 there to set the service fund at $4,000.
So, Mrs. Long? Mrs. Sloughman?
This is just the amount of money that we budgeted for the school board to attend any kind of professional training during the year. That's what the service fund is.
Any questions or comments? Okay, please call the roll.
Okay, Mrs. Sloughman?
Yes.
Mr. Carpenter?
Yes.
Mrs. Dorn?
Yes.
Mrs. Long?
Yes.
Mr. Price?
Yes. Motion passes.
Okay, could I get a motion to appoint the superintendent of schools as representative for federal funds for the district?
So moved.
Mrs. Warren? Mr. Price?
This is just the federal grants. He's necessarily the authorized representative of the district. I know Betsy Chad does a lot with the federal grant programs, and our office handles the financial part, and Doug is the authorized representative.
Any questions or comments? Please call the roll.
Mr. Carpenter?
Yes.
Mrs. Dorn?
Yes.
Mrs. Long?
Yes.
Mr. Price?
Yes.
Mrs. Sloughman?
Yes.
Motion passes.
All right, this is the big one, number 8. We have all of these items from A through O listed. I'm not going to read through or talk about all of them, but could I get a motion to approve those, and we'll have a discussion.
So moved.
Mrs. Long?
Second.
Mrs. Warren?
Okay, let me explain a couple of them, and if anyone has any questions, I'll look at the rest of them. The first one there, treasurers authorized to secure advanced draws as people pay their property taxes over a period of time, especially this first half. We don't get the final settlement from the county until like middle of March. So it's our money that's coming in. We are allowed to draw on it weekly, beginning about the first week of February. So this authorizes me to have the auditors send me the money that's been collected up to that point for property taxes. So there's no reason really to not pass this one. So the other one I wanted to talk about is the last one. You recall a few meetings back we have designated the treasurer as public records designee. Once every 2 years I have to attend public records training, records retention, and all that kind of stuff, public records requests. So that's to name me the person to do that. Everything in between here is pretty much, they're all something that we do every year, the standard operating procedures. But do you have any questions about any of them you would like me to talk about further or explain on that list?
Anyone? Then call the roll.
Mrs. Dorn?
Yes.
Mrs. Long?
Yes.
Mr. Price?
Yes.
Mrs. Sloughman?
Yes.
Mr. Carpenter?
Yes. Motion passes.
Okay.
The next one is to recommend the incumbent president serve as president pro tem in the annual reorganization meeting in January of 2022 until duly reappointed by associate board members or replaced by a duly elected successor at the annual reorganization meeting. We have a motion.
So moved.
Mrs. Long?
Second.
Mrs. Warren? So what that means is, it's in the beginning, in January of 2022, I would serve as the presiding officer until the election of officers took place in January of 2022, at which point then whoever was elected president then would take over the rest of the meeting. So it's just to make sure that we have a president at the beginning of the new meeting in January. Any other questions or comments? Okay, please call the roll.
Mrs. Long,
Yes.
Mr. Price, Mrs. Sloughman,
Yes.
Mr. Carpenter,
Yes.
Mrs. Dorn.
Yes.
Motion passes. The next one is to recommend the approval of membership and appointment of board members to the following positions. OSBA Association and appointment as legislative liaison, the student achievement liaison, the capital conference delegate, the capital conference alternate, a representative to the Education Foundation, the Financial Advisory Committee, the the Safety Committee, and the Business Advisory Council for Greene County ESC. So in your packet is a list of those positions and how we might fill them. If we don't fill them all this evening, we can have board members consider over the next, between now and our next meeting, which is a week from Saturday, what position they may wish to fill. So I was the legislative liaison last year. Mrs. Long, the student achievement. I was the delegate to the Capital Conference. Mrs. Long was the alternate. Mrs. France was the BSEF Foundation and also the Financial Advisory Committee. Safety Committee was Mr. Price and Mrs. Sloughman to the ESC Business Advisory. Are there any folks who want to continue in the same role that they had last year? I'm certainly willing to be the delegate to Capital Conference. Somebody else is interested in having that? Okay. I'll browse down through the list to see if there's folks who want that. Legislative liaison. It was my role last time. It was very well filled by Mrs. Kingston when she was serving on the board. She was very, very diligent and disciplined in providing information to us. All right, we'll go on. The student achievement liaison. Who's on that one?
I can do that. I really can't hear it.
Oh, okay. Sorry.
I don't
Is that
really
any
hear
better?
it. I can do that again.
Okay. The alternate to Capital Conference, it does mean that you need to attend a Capital Conference. It's a 3-day conference in November.
That one's important to be one of you who are, have years left on your term. There'll be a few that are up for re-election at that point in time, so probably me. One of
Yeah, that would be,
one of the two
that would be fair.
would be wise if that's in November.
I'll pencil you in.
Okay.
All right. I represented to BSEF, Education Foundation.
I'm happy to take on either or both of those that Mrs. Franz was handling.
Okay. Everybody for both? Safety Committee, Mr. Price, are you interested? Yes, sir. And the ESC Business Advisory, Mrs. Slumper? Okay.
So what about the representative to the Greene County Career Center? When are we going to discuss that?
We have that as one of the items in the end of our items of information discussions. It's on one of the next to the last item on our schedule.
Okay, got it.
You got it. Any interest in the legislative liaison from anyone? And we'll talk about that again on the 23rd. So for the positions, we have Mrs. Long for Student Achievement Liaison, Mr. Carpenter for the delegate to Capital Conference, Mrs. Long for the alternate delegate, Mrs. Dorn for the representative to the SEF and for the Financial Advisory Committee, Mr. Price for Safety Committee, and Mrs. Sloughman to ESC Business Advisory. Any other questions or comments?
You aren't taking the, at this point, the legislative liaison until we discuss it further, right?
Right, not until we get a chance to talk about it.
Okay.
Please call the roll.
Okay, Mr. Price?
Yes.
Mrs. Sloughman?
Yes.
Mr. Carpenter?
Yes,
Mrs. Dorn?
Yes.
Mrs. Long?
Yes.
motion passes. All right, number 11 is to recommend the approve of a facsimile signature of the treasurer on checks. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Mrs. Dorn?
Yes.
Mrs. Sloughman? Any questions or comments? Please call the roll.
Okay, Mrs. Sloughman?
Yes.
Mr. Carpenter?
Yes,
Mrs. Dorn?
Yes.
Mrs. Long?
Yes.
Mr. Price?
Yes.
motion passes. Number 12, to recommend the adoption of a resolution to waive the reading of the records of the proceedings of previous meetings, in accordance with section 3313.26 of the Ohio Revised Code. The motion,
So moved.
Mrs. Sloughman,
Second.
Mrs. Long, and that allows us to approve minutes from prior meetings without having to read through them in a public meeting, which saves a pretty fair amount of time, especially since it's available for folks to see. Any other questions or comments? Please call the roll.
Mr. Carpenter?
Yes,
Mrs. Dorn?
Yes.
Mrs. Long?
Yes.
Mr. Price?
Yes.
Mrs. Sloughman?
Yes.
motion passes. And number 13, to recommend the authorization for district's continuation in the membership in the Southwestern Ohio Educational Purchasing Cooperative and the Ohio Purchasing Cooperative Program, and hereby approve the payment of all applicable membership fees. Have a motion?
So moved.
Mrs. Long,
Second.
Mrs. Dorn. And this essentially is our co-op that allows us to work with other districts on establishing good pricing for a variety of things that school districts in general need to purchase. So this is a cost savings opportunity for us to participate in those co-ops. Other questions or comments?
Does this require us to purchase through that cooperative in any instance, or is it just an option to us?
That's a good question.
I'm sorry to hear the second.
Sorry.
Are we
Is this-
required?
Is this, yeah, are we required to purchase things through this in any instance, or is it just we pay the membership and now it becomes an option to us if
It's an option, but I'm the representative to that monthly, and we have monthly meetings, well, maybe about 9 or 10 times a year, not every month, but, and there are about 100 school districts, so we need 2 school buses, we're buying them with maybe 50 school bus order, so we can get big quantity discounts on things. Everything from classroom supplies to school buses to library stuff to furniture, health insurance, to cover about anything you could possibly think of in purchasing quantity. I don't know how much we save in medical insurance just by having the big purchasing power of all those districts going together.
Good question. Other questions, comments? All right, please call the roll.
Mrs. Dorn?
yes.
Mrs. Long?
Yes.
Mr. Price?
Yes.
Mrs. Sloughman?
Yes.
Mr. Carpenter?
Yes, motion passes. And this ends the section of our reorganization of meetings. All right, Mr. Limey, the treasurer's report as part of our beginning of our regular meeting.
Yes, could I get a motion to approve the minutes from the special meetings held December 3rd, 7th, and 8th, and the regular meeting held December 10th?
So moved.
Mrs. Sloughman,
Second.
Mrs. Long. Any comments or corrections to the minutes? Mr. Limey, call the roll.
Mrs. Long?
Yes.
Mr. Price?
Yes.
Mrs. Sloughman?
Yes.
Mr. Carpenter?
Yes,
Mrs. Dorn?
Abstain.
motion passes.
Okay, could I get a motion to approve the treasurer's report for the month of December?
moved.
Mrs. Long,
Second.
Mrs. Sloughman,
Don't really have anything to specifically point out. This one, the information is all included with your agenda. Does anyone have any questions about anything that's listed there? We do each time include pie charts showing where we receive money, where it goes, and different budget breakdowns and a list of the cash balances in the general fund for the last 20 years or so, and how we balance out the money at the bank. It's all the items that are listed monthly.
any questions or comments? All right, please call the roll.
Okay, Mr. Price,
Yes.
Mrs. Sloughman,
Yes.
Mr. Carpenter,
Yes,
Mrs. Dorn,
Yes,
Mrs. Long.
Yes.
motion passes.
Okay, could I get a motion to approve the 2021 tax budget as reviewed during the budget hearing and held prior to this meeting?
so moved.
Mrs. Dorn,
Second.
Mrs. Sloughman. Any questions or comments? All right, Mr. Long, please call the roll.
Okay, Mrs. Sloughman,
Yes.
Mr. Carpenter,
Yes,
Mrs. Dorn,
Yes,
Mrs. Long,
Yes.
Mr. Price.
Yes.
motion passes.
Could I get a motion to approve an advance of $1,753.20 from the general fund to the network connectivity grant until state funding arrives, and then that will be paid back into the general fund?
We have a motion.
So moved.
Mrs. Long,
second.
Mrs. Dorn. Any questions or comments? This is kind of a normal kind of thing when the invoice comes in. Or no, that's not quite the same thing, is it?
Well, this is like with all federal and state grants, before we can get money to fund that grant, we have to spend it. So we spend the money and the account goes into the red. You're not supposed to finish a month in the red. And if they haven't reimbursed me yet for that, then we have to advance money from the general fund, wait on the reimbursement. Reimbursement comes in, and then we pay back that advance. It's a complicated procedure for a small amount of money.
Yes, it is. Any other questions or comments? All right, please call the roll.
Mr. Carpenter,
Yes,
Mrs. Dorn,
Yes,
Mrs. Long,
Yes.
Mr. Price,
Yes.
Mrs. Sloughman.
Yes.
motion passes. Was there any correspondence that people received in a general kind of way, or not specific about an individual, but in a general way that they want to share with the rest of the board? All right, going on, we'll go to reports to the board.
Yeah, so levy discussion here, and I'll probably do most of the talking, but Mr. Liming will chime in also. We had a pretty lengthy discussion at the December board meeting for not only the need for a levy, but getting into some details of the levy, such as the type, length, amount, etc. And the way I remember leaving it the last meeting in December, we were leaning heavily towards a 7-year emergency levy. So obviously, nothing was voted on, nothing was decided, but that's just where kind of the direction that the board was thinking at that point in time. So just to provide some more facts and information on decision making here. So here's just some facts and information. Obviously, we've had a levy that's failed 3 times, and essentially each of those levies has been for about 5.7 mils. Even that first one was a replacement levy. It was an effective rate of about 5.7. They were all continuing levies, and they were all for about $3.3 million, around in that range. So after the levy didn't pass in November of 2020, that's kind of our new normal. We had reductions were going to remain if the levy didn't pass, and if it would have passed, we would have brought some things back. But because of the 3 past levy failures going back to May of 2019, if you pass a levy in 19, you collect in 20. If you pass a levy in 20, you collect in 21. So we've had levy failures of both 19 and 20. So we have not collected on those in 20 and 21, if that makes sense. So if you look at it from that perspective, the district has not collected about $6.6 million if we would have passed it the first time around. If we'd have passed it last year at some point in time, we'd have collected about $3.3 million. And so to compensate for that non-collection of money, we've made over $4 million in reductions since 2018, about 11% of our staff, and as you know, we've cut some programs, K-5 STEM, K-6 art, busing. We've extended busing out for most of our district to the 2-mile minimum, except high school where it was eliminated. We've also done other reductions which really have increased our class sizes and also some electives, and I just named a few there, STEM and art. State cuts. So last May, April, May, right around in there, it was announced from the state as we started the pandemic there that the state was going to cut us about $650,000 for fiscal year 19, fiscal year 20, fiscal year 20. And then that cut was going to remain in fiscal year 21. So essentially we've had $1.3 million in state cuts. And we don't know if that's going to stay or not. We're planning for it to come back to the levels. That's kind of the word we've gotten, but who knows? We don't know what that's going to look like. And it's a new biennium budget with the new state legislature in July. And even though our fiscal year starts July 1, they probably won't get our budget to us, I don't know, mid-July, maybe August. So you start a fiscal year, you don't even know what your budget is from the state because they haven't passed their budget yet. So the challenge with that is you're trying to plan for a school year and you don't even know what your budget is from the state or whether you're going to get that money or not. It makes it very difficult. If the levy passes in May or November of this year, if we decide to go ahead with that, we don't get the money until January of 22. So whether it passes, either time it passes, we don't get that money until January 22, which is halfway through fiscal year 22. So next school year is 21-22 year. With new valuations, a mill is now worth about $657,000. That's up from about $582,000. If you look at what a 5.7 mil levy would bring in, I know when we're talking about emergency, it's a money amount, not a millage amount, but just to try to compare apples to apples from past kind of things. If we just look at it from a millage standpoint, if you go with a 5.7 mil levy, we'd collect about $3.7 million, which would be additional money from the $3.3 million that we would have collected if we'd have passed a 5.7 mil levy last year. Cost the same, about $199.50 per $100,000. So what millage would give us about the same amount of money as the last levy? About a 5.1 mil levy. Again, because the mill has gone up, the amount of the mill has gone up. So that's why you can have lesser millage and bring in the same amount of money to the school district. But the cost of the homeowner for a $100,000 house would be $178.50 for that 5.1 mil, down from $199.50. So even though it'd give us about the same amount, if you're looking at trying to get in those fours, a 4.9 mil would bring in about $3.22 million, somewhere in that range. And that's about $171 per 100,000. But that's about $100,000 less than what we were asking for essentially in the last three levies. Less millage, less money, less cost to the taxpayers. At a 4.9 is about $29 less per 100,000. So if kind of where I'm at, and I don't want to speak for Mr. Liming, but I think we're on the same page with this, is I really think that we need to be at about the 4.9 range. I really think that would be appealing to our taxpayers, that we will be asking for less millage, we're asking for less money, and it's less cost to them. about $29 less per $100,000. If we do that, though, we really can't make any promises from my perspective of bringing anything back. That doesn't mean stuff wouldn't come back at some point. We just really, I don't know if we could fiscally promise anything coming back, especially with, are those state cuts staying? You know, that's looming over us. We just don't know the answer to that. If it's decided that we want to bring some things back, then we probably need to raise that millage amount to something a little higher. So, you know, there's all different amounts that we can go with, but that's kind of where I'm at. Mr. Lyman, do you have any thoughts or comments on that?
Just a couple things. One, you were saying that, you know, it'd be less per $100,000 to the taxpayer. It's less millage, it's a lower amount. The other thing is, of course, it's a 7-year levy instead of continuing. That's another big one.
Good point. Yep, yep.
It's going to be on the ballot as an emergency levy if it's passed, is what we're talking about here. And just remember that there has to be two resolutions before I can file it with the Board of Elections by I think it's February 3rd is the deadline or something like that, February 1st. Planning on getting well ahead of that so I don't have to worry about the actual date. But so this first resolution, if we were to go with this tonight, it would not say 4.9 mils anywhere in that resolution, because this is a resolution for us to send to the county auditor saying we would like to place a emergency levy on the ballot in May that yields about $3,220,000. Can you tell us what millage would yield that much? Then he comes back, I already know ahead of time, it's about 4.9 for that amount. He's going to come back and formally with in writing say 4.9 mils would raise that much. And then we have to meet at a separate meeting from tonight and say, we motion to proceed with that 4.9 mil levy and place it on the ballot. So that's the difference between the two resolutions tonight. We're asking the county auditor to give us the millage. And then I guess the plan would be Saturday at our meeting, a week from this Saturday, we would then vote to proceed with it after we receive back the Dave Grant in the next couple of days, the millage. And then I could file it by the deadline.
How much more would we have to ask for to get some of the programs back? How much more would we have to ask for to get some of the programs back?
Well, it really depends on what kind of programs that we want to get back. I mean, it's probably in the lower fives is probably where we would have to be. Again, it doesn't mean that we can't bring those other programs back. It would just mean at this point there's just no promises of trying to bring those things back at this point.
Other questions, comments?
Why wouldn't we ask just a little bit more to get those programs back?
I mean, that's a great question. You know, we're at the point where obviously we want to bring as many programs back as possible. It's a matter of, you know, this is the fourth try and just trying to ask for the least amount of money as possible to really lower the cost to the taxpayer. So if we go to a higher millage, it's going to cost a little bit more for the taxpayer. So, for example, at a 5.4 mil, I'm sorry, a 5.3 mil would be about $185.50. It'd be $15 less. Whereas a 4.9 is about $29, $28 less.
So we're talking about $100 a year more? $400,000 house?
For $100,000, you're talking about $15, if you're comparing it to what?
So per year, what would the increase be? So
It'd be like-
$15 a month.
$185 a year. $185, so it'd be $15 less per year.
Per month.
Per year.
So I think what you're wanting
I'm sorry.
to know, Karen, if I'm interpreting right, what would be the difference between the 4.9 and the 5.3? And that would be about $14 per $100,000 home value.
Per month,
No.
Per year.
per year.
So it's $14 per year for each $100,000 value of your home. So a $400,000 home, it would be 4 times $15 a year. It also would appear on the ballot as a 5.3 instead of a 4.9. I don't know if that makes any difference. It just, you know, the idea is to try to get it the lowest amount possible, try to get something passed. But yeah, that would bring in that 0.4 of a mil between 4.9 and 5.3 would bring in about $300,000 extra for the budget.
How does it show on the ballot? Does it show as an amount? Does it show as millage? Does it show as millage and
I might have misspoken before, so but I know the exact right answer now for sure. It goes on as a millage and an amount both. I thought originally it was just the amount on emergency levy, but we've never done emergency levy before, so I can check on it.
How much longer do we have to endure the TIF that's on Cornerstone, do we know? Because it was a 10-year TIF,
Right. Let's see. Trying to think exactly when that went into place. Something like 6 years, I think.
I'm thinking we had 6 or 7 years left.
I can look that up and give the exact answer for you, but I know exactly what it would be.
Yeah, that doesn't exactly figure in because it's not like it's an incredible amount, but it is at least some.
Probably would be about $200,000 more a year we would get in that TIF. I mean, depending on a lot of things like, I know they're continuing to build there, but with the current situation today, the value of the properties, and the tax rate and all that, something like 200,000 more we would get. The other 45%, we're collecting 55% of full tax rate on it now, and it goes to 100 at the end of that TIF.
So we still have 6 or 7 years to endure that.
Yes. Let me check on that before I say for sure that's how many years. I'm pretty sure that's about what it is.
Well, for approximation purposes, it's sufficient.
So that was part of the rationale behind the 7-year duration for the emergency levy?
Yeah, I think that we need to make sure that we can at least get through that as compared to, that does give us a little bit of a bump. It's like you said, it's not a dramatic amount, but it's some.
The other thing I just thought about is that at the budget hearing, we were talking 2 of our debt instruments. One falls off in 3 years and one falls off in 4 years, so that will help us too. And those they're not large, but maybe $100,000 or $150,000 each that we would not be paying in those time periods.
So obviously, with emergency levy, you have an option of making it for as long as 10 years.
Right.
This is seen as a compromise between, a lower period, and the maximum is allowable.
Mm-hmm.
So 7 is a compromise that can potentially make it more acceptable to the community if they see that there's an attempt to limit, this one without a renewal.
I know that we need to be thrifty, but I think we also need to keep in mind that most of the people who vote our levies in are parents of school-aged children. And we need to make that levy somewhat attractive to them as well.
Mm-hmm. So
we need to try to bring some of these programs back. What's in it for the voter? We need to think about that.
Mm-hmm.
I would think that once we settle, assuming we settle here tonight on the fact that we're going to do this and we're now associated with it, if obviously we didn't have a lot of time between the last meeting and this one to quantify what the possible returns would be. So once we settle on, assuming we settle on that tonight, what that would be, then I suppose that Sean would ask that you come back, at future meetings and say, okay, now we've committed ourselves to an amount. This is what we project that we can bring back, if anything. And that will help with the messaging, the potential success of the levy, if it's understood what can be brought back. The one thing that the community needs to keep in mind is right now we're talking about maybe the potential of bringing something back. But at some point, if this levy doesn't pass, we're going to talk about cutting more things, right?
That's right.
And we're going to lose teachers, and it's going to just continue to erode the quality and this community can have out of the school system. So right now, based on the forecast, you can stiff arm that for about another year or so, right? And then it's going to get to the point where we start talking about more cuts, once the levy gets passed. So we have to keep in mind that we really need to be successful with this one, or else we are faced with a much more serious situation. I don't know, it's a year or two from now, right? Because we're looking forward, but in 2022, I think we were dipping down to less than $500,000 in reserves. And the recommendation for the state is on the order of around $3 million, as I recall. So we're already faced with that. So again, Jenny, I copy exactly what you're saying. We do need to understand what we can return with whatever amount we pay, with support, and that would be helpful to us. Obviously, it was difficult. You're looking at several different options, several different amounts, durations, everything else. So it wasn't practical for you to come back with full analysis of what can be returned. But once we commit ourselves to that, certainly me as a board member, I would want to see in the February, certainly by March timeframe, this is what we project. And I understand fully, though, we don't know what the school budget is going to be until after July, right, of each year. So we can only go off of what we know. So what we know now is we can assume we have assumed that this coming July, we're still going with an assumption of a reduction, right, to the $650,000 for the upcoming, or not. Now, we're projecting a restoration.
Yes.
Okay. So we're going to project a restoration this coming July, but it may not happen. And then we'll know that when school rolls around in September, and then we'll know that if they kept the cuts in place, then we're going to have further eroded our ability to restore anything. So it's a dynamic, it's not an absolute. Again, I would much appreciate this as a board member going into February, going into March, certainly April, really understanding what we project based upon our best information and what can be restored, because that will help the community make a better decision about whether they're willing to support what at this point we seem to be saying is emergency levy. Hopefully that's clear.
That's a good point, that you've heard me say this before, I always have to think about, in this district, because we get such little amount of state funding, that at some point down the road, hopefully in years, we have to have another levy. And I'm always worried about, from the expenditure standpoint, anything we do that's going to increase that by a substantial amount is going to move that up a little bit closer. That's the only thing. We can always afford it. Just depends on how long we want to go until, or we can go until further income revenues needed in some respect.
It's interesting you said the obvious, that for people that are informed, that this district is one of those districts that doesn't receive much from the state. Again, we get on the order of about 27% of our funding from the state. There are some school districts that get 70, 80, 90% of their funding from the state. I had some communication this week with the Ohio School Board Association. I asked them for some information as to what's, like we were saying, normal. So what we've seen in our school district is a necessity to return to the voters every 4 or 5 years for a levy. So is that normal? And OSBA, is one of the functions they're able to do is provide analysis and information data to our school districts. And what I heard back was out of 313 school districts, they averaged essentially over an 11-year period the necessity of doing about 2 or 3 levies every 11-year period. And that's a mixture of different types of levies, but just broadly speaking, these 313 districts are very similar to us, plus or minus 400 students of our school district. And so But like I was saying, it is normal because of the construct that the state of Ohio has made for our school systems, that whether we like it or not, we have to return to our communities for funding. And what Bellbrook has done historically is by no means an aberration from what 600 and some school districts across the state are faced with at one time or another. So again, when on average 2 or 3 levies are going forward over an 11-year period, the fact that Bellbrook is now sitting here 6 years now since the last levy passage, it is objectively reasonable that it's time for this community to recognize that the district is in serious financial straits. So again, the point needs to be really conveyed and strongly and repeatedly until it's understood. We are on the low receiving end of state funding because we live in a district that's assessed by the state, not by us necessarily individually, but by the state, based on our property values and our average income levels as an affluent district. That's the median, right? So there's some 50% of the people below that wouldn't agree with it. You know, you have some 50% of the people above that would say, yeah, we're an affluent community. Or I'm affluent in the community, if you want to say it that way. So those are the harsh realities we deal with. These are the cookies we've been given, dried and cold and crumbly that they are. But it's just that the community really needs to be an educational initiative, that our community becomes aware that this is normal in the state of Ohio. Where I lived in Utah, no, this doesn't happen. The state funds it all, and it's all taken care of. Property taxes are affordable right here, but their income taxes were higher, and you pay tax on food. So there's a different way of collecting people's money on food. So I appreciate you saying and reminding people that we get very low funding relative to from the state, especially in comparison to many other districts, even by Kettering is a good example. And so it's beyond reasonable. We return to the voters, and again, just based on real data, 313 districts, 2 or 3 levies, attempts every 11 years. So very good.
I didn't get the opportunity to be part of the conversation, obviously, last meeting, but I sat here in the audience. And the question I wanted to bring up, and Kevin, maybe you've thought about this the most, as you're discussing the 7-year, and by no means am I advocating to go continuing. I think I want to hear your opinions, though, is I'm sitting here thinking of this school board 7 years from now, and is this decision somewhat short-sighted in that we're going to be setting them up for a radical mountain to overcome, and what would we need to do in the meantime to make sure we're not doing that? Because again, a continuing, I understand, is not super palatable with the community, but at the same time, when it expires, it's going to go away, and we know we're going to be 7 years further down the road and need even more.
That's a point extremely well taken,
Yes.
and one that I think all of us have pondered, and I've certainly given a tremendous amount of thought to it. Because what you run into, let's just make up numbers here, just make life easy, right? Or at least a contemplation of this. Let's just say out of a emergency levy you get $1 million. Well, so for the next 7 years you get $1 million a year. Well, in 7 years, when a year you don't get that anymore. Now in the meantime, because of inflation, we don't need $1 million anymore. We need $2 million because so now what you run into is the fact you've got a levy expiring. At the same time, you're saying, hey, we need more money. And so, and therefore it becomes a challenge, right? And I think that was one of the reasons that the board back in May was averse to going with going with the emergency levy was because of that train wreck that you're building, 7 years from now if we go with emergency or any type of limited period. However, here's the reality. There have been 3 continuing levies and they failed. So do we continue to do the same thing, albeit maybe with a little bit less, asking for a little bit less money? Or do we demonstrate to the community that we hear their aversion to a continuing levy. And then also, if we were to go with a limited period levy of any type, let's just say emergency like this one, there's been discussion, and we brought up a few times during board meetings, that we in this community are entirely reliant upon property taxes and state funding. And the property taxes fund one about, correct me if I'm wrong, about 62% of our budget. And so the fact that we are so reliant upon property taxes and get so little from the state, paints us into a serious corner there. So what's an alternative? And what would help our neighbors, our family, our friends that are indeed faced with, they're retired, they're on Social Security, they're on disability. What would help them? And so you start thinking about an alternative such as, and let me be very clear when I say this, a earned income tax for the schools only. At that point, people that would be affected by this emergency levy, initially they're going to have to pay money that may be a real challenge for them over, let's say, a year's period or 2 years period. But if we can build educational awareness in our community that it's time to look at an alternative and additional funding stream for our schools, and then we help elderly understand that 30-40% of our community that are above 55 or so, I haven't seen the statistics myself, they actually, Mary or Joe or Jim, if this other proposal, which hasn't been quantified, but it's just ideas we've thrown out there, if we were to go forward with a school earned income tax, then we can actually look at replacing some of our existing property taxes with the income that comes from that. So you can actually start removing some of our existing property tax levies that are permanent, and basically offset that with the income you would get from, an income tax. So therefore, the community that's most affected and most negatively affected by our property taxes will actually see their overall tax burden go down. And that's a really hard argument for somebody to oppose, especially to those people. Who would say, well, I don't want my taxes to go down? That's really the question you'd be asking. Do you want your taxes to go down, yes or no? Because people that are on Social Security retirement would be unaffected by the by the income tax, and they would see actually their property tax removed. So I think David's talked. He's actually identified a couple of continuing property taxes that are about 1.8 mils or 2 mils effective millage right now, right? That you could look at. If you went for 0.25% earned income tax, you could actually remove. So I'm sorry, going to a long discussion here, but the gist of it is this. Essentially, we have, if we were to see a emergency levy pass, we've got a clock that starts ticking. And we as a board, we as a community, have been given time then to find an alternative. Whether it's shaking the money tree at the state, that's not going to happen. Okay. So the only real practical alternative would be to look at this earned income tax, which is really a norm for so many districts throughout the state. It's just, we're one of those, we have a perfect storm here. We have high property values, we have high average income, we don't have an income tax. And so, 99-year-old Jim Martin that lives out here on the same property for 75 years, sees his taxes go up, every 4 or 5 years because of the way we have this dynamic here that we're faced with. So that's it in a nutshell, as I see it. Obviously, I'm just one person here, but I've given a tremendous amount of thought to this. And at the end of the day, I fear if we go back with a continuing, that it's going to be like, well, that's what we said no to 3 times in a row. So what's different here? And the other thing with an emergency that I conveyed in May of last year and then at the last board meeting as well, when you say emergency, that's a message, And I think we're in an emergency here because again, if we don't pass the levy in May this year, and we don't pass it in November, we are in dire straits because then we're going to start talking about more cuts next year. So anyhow, that's how I see it. It's just one perspective, but it does create that possible train wreck in 7 years from now, if indeed we've not been successful. When I say we as a community, have not been successful in migrating to an alternative to almost near exclusive reliance upon property taxes for the funding of the schools.
And I think that's important, is that we go into this eyes wide open knowing that this, with a 7-year clock on it, means that those 7 years have to be
They have to be productive in finding us
get
another
at
revenue
it,
stream.
get creative,
Yeah.
and not just for the people at this table, but for the whole community. And I think that's partly what Kevin just said is the answer to your question a little bit, Karen. We're asking for an emergency levy. I don't feel like we should be putting an emergency levy on the ballot to bring back programs that have already been cut. Like, an emergency levy should be to tread water. I mean, if we're gonna be honest, right, and as much as I have children in this district and I want to see them have STEM and art, if we're gonna call this an emergency, we need to ask for the part that is the emergency. And I don't think an emergency levy to bring back programs sends the right message at all. And then additionally, I think a lot of folks would push for further from the state, and that would all be wonderful if additional funds rain from the state. However, right now we know the state has already taken money from us because their budget's wiped.
Right.
So I think any change in state policy is going to mean they have to ask for additional funding. They're not going to take money from another district, a less affluent district, to give it to us.
Right.
That's not gonna fly. So the only way the state gets more money to give to us is to raise our state taxes. And personally, I'm more comfortable sending money directly to this building than sending it to Columbus and hoping that some of it comes back.
I think it would be pretty reliable that if we send money to the state, we're not going to get that much
Right,
back.
I mean, I'll send them $10 to get one,
27.
and that's not how it should be. And that's why we should speak to those lawmakers that are there to try to fix that problem. But I think this is likely one we're gonna have to solve on our own.
Mhm.
So, okay, thank you. I appreciate that, Kevin.
Yeah. And the 7 years does give us opportunity, like you were talking about, to establish some alternatives. You know, just like people balance their, retirement or funds and portfolios, their investments, they balance those so to mitigate risk. At the same time, it's prudent for us to diversify our revenue portfolio because if we're completely dependent on the state, then and they choose to make cuts, then we are in dire straits again. So I'm for long-term diversifying our revenue stream. Other questions or comments?
It is a moving target. One thing I've kind of picked up on from being at these meetings and learning a little bit from the treasurer here is that they do their best to say, okay, this is what we project, and then if the state comes back in July and says, well, we're going to continue that $50,000 reduction, that's devastating, So, but while we like to say that we don't want to, it may be disingenuous to say we're going to restore some things if we go to the emergency levy. Because of the constantly moving target here, we may find that they can restore some things, especially if the state stays, consistent with what, maybe they come back with some additional funding or whatever. They realize they created a problem for us. So I would not want to say we're not going to restore anything, but I think it's really evident it's not going to be a full restoration of everything that's been lost thus far. The 33 positions, the busing, the 85 supplementals, there's some things that are high priorities, like STEM, art, librarians, so hopefully, once they really sharpen their pencils and go take a look, maybe those things can be restored. And so I wouldn't want to go so low on emergency levy that it gave us zero over that and still put us at risk for further deficits, especially if the state comes in back in July and says, oh, by the way, we're going to continue at $650,000. So I think that I think we shouldn't go ultra low, but I think we need to recognize we should go a bit lower with the understanding that the community's communicated that, hey, they're okay with us losing some things from our school system. We can maybe quantify a little better once we, really committed ourselves to this. And I think they couldn't quite do this in the month that we said, hey, we're going to look at 5 different levy options as far as amounts, so.
I think a lot of those cuts, if I remember right, were just delays of large purchases. So, I mean, before we talk about bringing back programs, ongoing programs, I would think we need to buy those buses. We need to do that tech refresh, things that that need to happen, that are necessities that have simply been delayed. I would assume those would be priority.
Yeah, I mean, if we remember the promise or so, if the levy did not pass, that's kind of our new normal. And we essentially lost $3.3 million by not passing a levy last year. And so to try to make that up is almost impossible. It's extremely challenging to make that up. And there's nothing that I would like to bring everything we possibly can back. To me, it's just extremely challenging to make those promises when you're trying to keep the cost to the homeowner as low as possible. They've said, don't do continuing, so we're doing a limited term levy. They also, I think, said, don't do $200. And so what's the lowest amount that we can get, or what's the lowest amount that the homeowner can pay? We're $100,000, or we're still going to be providing a quality educational experience. And maybe we need to be creative of trying to find other ways to have STEM, have art, and maybe it's not the full-blown what we've been doing in the past, but still giving students those experiences. Again, especially with the state cuts looming over us for next year, that's not in our budget. We have it going back to normal. And so I just would want to, it's a balancing act there between, you're going to bring things back, or is it really an emergency? If we're saying it's an emergency, that's what it said. It's an emergency, but we're bringing things back. Yeah, I agree, Audra, that's Mrs. Dorn, that's a little contradictory there of yes, we want to bring these things back, we want our kids to have these experiences, but we're not at that level yet. We're still here. We need to work our way back to that a little bit. And maybe a year or two from now, we can bring those things back, or something back, or some type of experience back. We're just we need to get a levy passed. We need some financial stability in the school district. So what is the package that's going to be most palatable to our community, to still providing a quality educational experience? That's kind of where I'm at, my perspective of really where I think we really need to be at the 4.9 piece. It's really, I think where we need to be around. Again, just because less millage, almost a whole mill less, we're going to receive less money. It's going to be less cost to the taxpayer. It's less of everything. It's still close where we need, but it is less. That's where I'm at with stuff.
Anything else? We have a motion coming up where we can discuss this further, but I'm going to switch us over to the open communication period at this point. Well, this will be short because no one signed up to speak. All right, then, going on to number 18.
Thought we were going to buy a little time.
No, not buying any time. Want me to read that, or is that from you? It's a recommendation.
That is Kevin.
Okay.
That's under Kevin's part, I believe, isn't it, Kevin?
Right.
What's that now?
You're number 18.
18? Yes. Okay, can I get a motion to approve let's see, let me say this correctly. request the Greene County Auditor to certify the current tax valuation and calculate and certify a 7-year emergency operating tax levy to generate, and if you want to fill in the blank, I've got the amount for 4.9 mils. It's $3,220,000 in operating funds to be placed before the voters on the May 4th election. So we've got May 4th, 7-year emergency levy. We're going to request the Greene County Auditor to tell us the millage that would raise $3,220,000 for that school funding to be collected beginning January 22, if it passes.
Do we have a motion?
So,
Mr. Price? I'll second. All right, further discussion, comments? All right, Mr. Lyman, please call the roll.
Okay, Mrs. Dorn,
Yes.
Mrs. Long,
Yes.
Mr. Price,
yes.
Mrs. Sloughman,
Yes.
Mr. Carpenter.
Yes, motion passes.
Yep, ready to move on to my part? All right, new business, certificated license employment resignation, leave of absence, supplemental duty. Recommend approval of the following supplemental duty contracts for the remainder of the 2021 school year. Andrew Hartley and Andrew Solomon.
You have a motion? Mrs. Long,
Second?
Mrs. Dorn? Any questions or comments? All right, please call the roll.
Mrs. Long,
Yes.
Mr. Price,
Yes.
Mrs. Sloughman,
Yes.
Mr. Carpenter,
Yes,
Mrs. Dorn.
Yes.
motion passes.
Be resolved, the Bellbrook-Sugarcreek Board of Education has offered these supplemental duty positions via posting licensed employees of the district. The board either had no qualified licensed employee applicants or no employees applied before these positions were offered to non-licensed persons. The following non-licensed persons have met qualifications for the board posting of supplemental duty positions as noted below. Recommend approval of the following supplemental duty contracts for the 2021 school year. Jeff Chu, Zachary Chu, Rob Hessinger, Don Kuntz, Barth Schenk, and Sarah Wall.
Do you have a motion? Mrs. Sloughman,
Second.
Mrs. Long? Any questions or comments? All right, please call the roll.
Mr. Price,
Yes.
Mrs. Sloughman,
Yes.
Mr. Carpenter,
Yes,
Mrs. Dorn,
Yes.
Mrs. Long.
Yes.
motion passes.
Recommend approval of the following supplemental duty volunteers for the 2021 school year. Trevor Atkins, Christopher Crane, Keith Douglas, Rebecca Glenn, Steve Greck, Craig Holder, Elizabeth Howard, Trevor Narker, and Michael Reagan.
And we have that.
And, yes, I'm sorry, and Nick Combs, assistant football. Thank you, Mr.
Yep.
Carpenter.
We have a motion.
So moved.
Mrs. Sloughman?
Second?
Mrs. Dorn? Any questions or comments? All right, Mr. Lonnie, please call the roll.
Okay, Mr. Carpenter,
Yes,
Mrs. Dorn,
Yes.
Mrs. Long,
Yes.
Mr. Price,
Yes.
Mrs. Sloughman.
Yes.
this motion passes.
Recommend approve the following substitute teachers, school nurse for the second semester of the 2021 school year. Martha Brown, Lauren Donaldson, Jennifer Fair, Monica Glick, and Amy Riggs.
We have a motion.
So moved.
Mrs. Long?
Second?
Mrs. Dorn? Any questions or comments? All right, please call the roll.
Mr. Carpenter,
Yes,
Mrs. Dorn,
Yes.
Mrs. Long,
Yes.
Mr. Price,
Yes.
Mrs. Sloughman.
Yes.
motion passes.
Recommend acceptance of resignation for the purpose of full STRS retirement for middle school teacher Kimberly Lord, effective end of day, May 31st, 2021.
We have a motion.
So moved.
Mrs. Dorn?
Second.
Mrs. Sloughman? Questions or comments?
She was our STEM teacher at the middle school, and right now she's one of our BOA teachers for the middle school.
Okay. All right, Mr. Lyman, please call the roll.
Mrs. Dorn,
Yes.
Mrs. Long,
Yes.
Mr. Price,
Yes.
Mrs. Sloughman,
Yes.
Mr. Carpenter.
Yes. Motion passes.
Recommend approval of the following substitute support staff for the second semester of the 2021 school year. Martha Brown and Olivia Met.
We have a motion?
So moved.
Mrs. Long,
Second.
Mrs. Dorn. Questions or comments? All right, Mr. Lyman, please call the roll.
Mrs. Long,
Yes.
Mr. Price,
Yes.
Mrs. Sloughman,
Yes.
Mr. Carpenter,
Yes.
Mrs. Dorn.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Revisions to school fees, 2021. Recommend approval to amend the 2021 student fee schedule to reflect a reduction in high school winter guard fees from $775 to $450.
We have a motion.
So moved.
Mrs. Dorn, Mrs. Sloughman. And this is because of not having a same amount of travel and so forth associated with going to.
Right, reduction in season, yep.
I have one, so.
Not as many competitions, not
Okay.
having to travel. A lot of them are held virtually now.
Yeah.
So
Yep.
everybody's home court advantage. All right, Mr. Lyman, please call the roll.
Mr. Price,
Yes.
Mrs. Sloughman,
Yes.
Mr. Carpenter,
Yes,
Mrs. Dorn,
Yes.
Mrs. Long.
Yes.
motion passes.
D, revision of the board meeting calendar. Recommend approval for revisions to the 2021 board meeting calendar.
Do we have a motion?
So moved.
Mrs. Sloughman,
Second.
Mrs. Dorn.
And just to kind of explain, so we approved actually this calendar last month, and it's really the same dates on here. We just have moved anything that from the last board calendar that was a special meeting, we have moved that, or we have stated that, we have named that now regular/work session, so that we can do regular business during that meeting, but it is essentially a work session. So we'll follow the same routine as a regular board meeting,
Okay,
even though there probably won't be all the stuff, all these different things in the meeting, but the
In the
structure will
session.
be the same.
all right. Mr. Lyman, please call the roll.
Mrs. Sloughman,
Yes.
Mr. Carpenter,
Yes,
Mrs. Dorn,
Yes.
Mrs. Long,
Yes.
Mr. Price.
Yes.
motion passes.
Others you, Mr. Carpenter,
Okay,
or is that me?
it can be me. It's
Okay.
fine. The next item is a resolution in support of the OSBA Legal Assistance Fund. We each got some information about the Legal Assistance Fund. It involves annual dues of $250. I'll read the resolution. Whereas the Bellbrook-Sugarcreek Local Board of Education wishes to support the efforts of other boards of education to obtain favorable judicial decisions, and whereas the Ohio School Boards Association Legal Assistance Fund has been established for this purpose, therefore the board hereby resolves to participate in the OSBA LAF, or Legal Assistance Fund, for calendar year 2021, and authorizes the treasurer to pay the Legal Assistance Fund dues of $250. We have a motion.
So moved.
Mrs. Dorn.
Second.
Mrs. Long. Anybody have questions, comments?
This is something I don't think we've done in the past, Mr. Lyman, have we? Or it's been a while since we've done?
It's been a long time since
It's a long time.
we did it for a few years in the early 2000s.
Again, I think it would help with OSBA of their statewide initiatives or them fighting for school districts, so it's $250, but that is totally up to the board, what they want to do for this.
In a sense, with some of these funding issues, what other boards might be fighting for this counter to what benefits us? Is that a concern? I mean, are we helping, fight for further state policies that will continue to give less money to our district and more money to others? I get that, I don't need to belabor this, I know this is a relatively small amount of money.
Sure.
Maybe, well, so OSBA was in favor of the state funding proposal. But again, they're representing the entire state, but then obviously we disagreed with that. But then there's a wide variety of other issues or concerns that we would be on the same page with them. So, it's one of those, maybe you can't agree with them on every single decision, but, if that speaks to us so much that we don't want to support that, then, again, we haven't done this in the past. If we don't want to do it this year, we're not breaking anybody's bank either way on that.
Yeah, I have no strong objection.
I know that I don't know whether it's part of our regular membership in the OSBA, but I've had occasions to reach out to their legal department just with questions and also to say what's happening with other districts in the state in this kind of a thing. And they don't give, and under those circumstances, they don't give legal advice, and that's probably not exactly what this is for. But they can say, what our experience is to see X or whatever. So they can be helpful without being specifically giving legal advice. Any other questions or comments? All right, let's call the roll.
Okay, Mr. Carpenter,
Yes.
Mrs. Dorn,
Yes?
Mrs. Long,
Yes.
Mr. Price,
Yes.
Mrs. Sloughman.
Yes.
Motion passes. The next is a representative to the Greene County Career Center Board, a resolution. We'll have to defer on that. We have reached out to one of the candidates who applied for the board position, who may be a good candidate. We are waiting to hear back from that individual for their response. So we'll have to defer this one until we have a candidate who is.
Did they respond? They're just contemplating the potential service opportunity, or they, or if they got the message?
No. Their response was one of, yes, I'm very interested in that. Let me
Help my wife or my husband?
yeah, that's right, and get back with you on Monday.
Okay, good.
Okay, that'll be fine. So
Right, good.
we could address this on the 23rd.
Good.
Board minutes and meeting calendar. One of the things that we brought up last time was to post our specific board minutes and meeting calendar on our website. We do have our meeting calendar already on our school website. The specific minutes, we can publish the board bits, which is essentially a general summary of that. But once we approve minutes, we could post them on our website. So if that is something that the board would like to do, I don't think it requires a resolution to do that. If we have general consensus though that that's something we'd like to do, we can go ahead and do that.
A little bit more on that. I think it's important. One of the, shall I say, suggestions from the community is that we be more communicative with them. And so the board bids don't really, as they are right now, don't really capture, completely what happens in the meeting.
The same level of detail.
Yeah,
I would
exactly.
agree.
So when you're trying to go back historically and look at what really happened, it's kind of hard to glean that from that. So one of the things I would like to see go into our minutes is not the fact that we had, 5 days or whatever. I would like to see whoever voted and how they voted. I would like to see it listed.
Mm-hmm.
So if we have 4 yeas and 1 nay, 3 yeas, 2 nays, we know who voted how.
And that actually is reflected in our minutes, isn't it?
No, it's not. I mean, if you look here, for with what we have in our packet, it just says 4 yeas and 1 nay or whatever, or 5 yeas, and it doesn't go into detail even for our own benefit. So if you Kevin, you very diligently record that every meeting, but I don't see any record of where that actually is available to even me as a board member to see who voted how and why when.
Yes, I'm fine with that. What if we do this, if it's all yes, it continue to say that. If someone votes no, then you put the whole vote out there.
Okay. Yeah.
That way I don't have to do, we don't have to type in yes, 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 and everyone's saying every single vote.
That's okay. There just needs to be some way of knowing someone's voting record.
Yes.
Because at times that's come up for discussion, and now it's a way of pointing back and even for myself, seeing who voted how, when, on what. And related to that, to again the package, and what I was kind of one was asking for this last time, as I look through my packet here, there's very little that really shouldn't be fully available to the community. An application with somebody's address and references, no. But like the treasurer's report, which we always refer to with the pie charts and all, I think when I sat in the audience, I find, before I got on the board, it's a little bit frustrating because I'm trying to say, well, what are they looking at? And maybe it's projected on a screen, and I've got 30 seconds to take that in, and then I have no ability to go get that afterwards. So I can see no reason, again, in the interest of full visibility to the community, if anything I have in this packet that doesn't involve personally identifiable information, that it should just be, you go to the board section, you go to the meeting, and you can pull it up. And if you're like me, especially me, as a board member, who forgets to pick his packet up until the last possible moment, I could still, at 6:05, go, oh shoot, I forgot again, and I can go on there and I can grab those things. So of course you guys will bring them to me because I forget all the time. But my point being is that anything that's in this packet, except for personally identifiable information, in my opinion, should be fully available to the community. It needs to stay in age with digitization. It's simple to do that. So that's my pitch here.
I would concur with that. I'm not so sure we can get it all on the website before the meeting, though. That would be.
Help me out, because I'm going to forget again. So, well, but then again, I actually would like that, though, especially the treasurer's report, because it doesn't mean as much,
during the time.
historically, when we're going to talk about it tonight. So if somebody is an informed citizen that comes to me and say, hey, what about the pie chart, or what about April's, whatever we got here, end of month report, whatever, at least somebody can have an opportunity to say, I'm looking at that, I got a question about it. So my pitch would be really that it would be.
Do we know if we have any legal issues with, like having the treasurer's report before it's approved? Things like that.
Pending approval, you put a pending approval watermark on it.
I don't know why this would be different, but I heard the same thing you mentioned though on the minutes, that they aren't supposed to be public information until they're approved at the next board meeting. So we have a meeting tonight, we meet a month, if our next meeting was a month from now, we would meet and approve those.
And I'm okay with that.
Now they're on the website.
I'm okay with that. I mean, that makes sense to me.
I think we could do the financial report. It's like, how difficult is it to get, if we're doing everything in the packet, we might be doing 30 pages or something like that sometimes, of 5 or 6 financial and all the other stuff in here. But I don't have any problem putting the financial report in the minutes on there.
Sure. Again, I just want people to be able to know what we're going to discuss, especially with respect to financial matters, and be able to review it and see the same things we see up here. Because it has to be frustrating sitting in the audience, and they see us doing this and go, yeah, I approve that, and they don't even know what we're looking at. So in the interest of full and open disclosure, I just believe it needs to be available. And in some cases, it has to be historical, because like I said, you can't provide 45 minutes that aren't final yet. They can't be final until we approve them. At least you've got the ability to go back and look what's been going on with the board for the last 4, 5, 6 months.
I agree. Actually, I advocated for that 4 years ago. I didn't get any traction then, so. So to the extent that we can do that, both reasonably and legally, we should do that. Is that
Yep.
what I'm hearing from folks?
I agree.
Okay, great. We will do that. So we'll target that for our next meeting. Thank you. All right, I'll turn this one back to you, Dr. Cozet, for first semester bullying report.
Yep, so we have to do a semi-annual update on bullying reports. So these are reported incidents at Stephen Bell. We had 0, BCI 3, middle school 4, and high school 0. Again, these are the ones that are reported. We investigated, we looked into them, and then whatever the appropriate consequences are of those actions. So we take everyone seriously and we fully investigate, and whatever the appropriate consequences are, those are taken care of.
All right, any questions on the bullying report? All right, finally, we have an executive session for the purpose of considering employment and compensation of a licensed public employee per revised code 121.22, paragraph G1. Do we have a motion?
So moved.
Mrs. Dorn?
Second.
Mrs. Long? Mr. Runner, please call the roll.
Mrs. Dorn,
Yes.
Mrs. Long,
Yes.
Mr. Price,
Yes.
Mrs. Sloughman,
Yes.
Mr. Carpenter.
Yes, motion passes. Do we anticipate having any action after we come out of executive session? Okay. We anticipate no action coming out of executive session. So we are going in at 8:32.
Hold on.
Kevin,
You can give it to me.
Okay, we are out of executive session at 10:08. Do we have a motion for adjournment?
So moved.
Second.
Mrs. Sloughman, Mrs. Long? Any discussion?
Yeah, I would like to know. Let's discuss our.
All right, I will call the roll. Mrs. Sloughman?
Yes.
Mr. Price?
Yes.
Mrs. Dorn?
Yes.
Mrs. Long?
Yes.
Mr. Carpenter, yes. Motion passes. We are adjourned.